Earth Defense Force World Brothers. This is a game that I've been kind of interested in checking out for a really long time. I'm not the biggest Earth Defense Force fan. If you don't know much about Earth Defense Force, it's basically kind of, I don't know what you call it, like a wave-based game where giant like insects and bugs attack you, and you have, typically they're, in single player, you're on your own, or there's like, I feel like it's more of a multiplayer game, but maybe that's just the way I play it, where you play with like, 3 to 4 other people, and it's got ridiculous weapons and things like that. So often these weapons can be very useless, but they can be very fun to use. And like part of the fun, I think, of Earth Defense Force is just kind of trying out all the different weapons and things like that. So, but I think one of the challenges that come up if you play an Earth Defense Force game typically is that the class-based system in the game is like, I don't want to say restrictive, but like when you choose a character class, you have a very set and defined role of how you not only engage with enemies, but also kind of move about the world. So there's characters like the wing divers, you can like basically fly around all the stage. And then you have like the fencers, which are more tanky. I forget if they're engineer or vehicle or something. There's like one where they can call in vehicles and things like that. And then finally, there's also just like the standard like ranger soldier guy who's, pretty limited on like how they can actually move around the map and things like that. But at the very least, I think they just have like a very straightforward, powerful arsenal to like just do a lot of damage at like a good range as well. So every one of these classes have like their own distinct ways that they work, and when you play a multiplayer game, I think it's like a lot about like how these classes interact with each other. But with World Brothers specifically, it's a lot more, I think, it's more in line with a single player game in the sense that like you can kind of like switch between classes. It's like a cutesy version of Earth Defense Force, and the key gimmick here is that basically you can have 4 character slots. And as you play through the game, you earn new characters throughout the game, and each of those characters have their own distinct kind of like move sets and special abilities, kind of like a Overwatch kind of thing where they have like ultimates and things like that with meters they build up. And they also kind of fit within the traditional EDF classes as well, but maybe just they all have their own like unique gimmick. So what happens is when you're playing the game, unlike a normal kind of Earth Defense Force game where you kind of are stuck with your main class plus the 2 weapons you decide to bring, or 3 weapons depending on the class you're playing, you have a lot of flexibility in how you approach each situation, really. I don't say each mission, but really each situation, where you can basically switch over to a wing diver to move around the stage. You can switch to, your fencer type once you're like actually in front of the enemy. Ranger type can you shoot at range, all that kind of stuff, right? So it basically makes it so you as a single person have the capabilities to basically, in a lot of ways, like take care of yourself. Like you don't have to rely on anything else. You can just be as flexible as you want, be as powerful as you want. And a lot of it just comes down to optimizing kind of when you use characters and at what time kind of thing. Because each of these characters most of them are fairly distinct. There's this kind of weird system where there's like alpha, beta, and omega versions of them. And I think at the time when I was playing with my friends, we had kind of determined that the stats of the top level version was just like the best version. And so when you leveled up a character, maybe unfortunately so, a lot of times you just kind of focus on the omega characters because you're like, oh, well, if I'm going to use this class, this is the character I'm going to use because it's the strongest version kind of thing. But even, characters that typically wouldn't have a lot of movement options, or maybe they have limited movement options, they usually have like some, major strength to them. So in the case of like, well, I don't say limited movement options until use an example of a movement option, but there's like these kind of like slower tanky like astronaut guys, and you can kind of like hold down the shift button to charge and like launch them around the stage, and you can kind of like run into enemies and things like that. So there's a lot of things like that where it's just like there's a very distinct ability that kind of makes this character strong in their own way. You can do like weapon swapping and things like that as well. So this game does still have, I believe, 1 weapon per character, as well as some accessories to power them up. And so you have that 1 weapon, and then you can like kind of customize that character depending on, or to change that weapon depending on like the type of moveset you want to use for that character, or I guess the character you have. They have a moveset, you try to pick something that complements it best, right? And then that kind of comes down to like complementing the rest of your team and things like that. So I think the biggest issue with this, for me at least personally, is that when you play multiplayer, I think it's a lot more of a isolated experience where in the case of like a regular Earth Defense Force game, I played the last game I played as a wing diver, which is the flying character that flies around. I had like very specific job roles, and often people would need to call out to me to go do something, right? So when I'm playing on multiplayer and voice chat, it's a lot more of like a coordinated effort and things like that. Where when you play in World Brothers, everybody kind of has these tools that they need. So unless they're really in a dire situation where they like are actually dying, right? I think it's one of those things where you don't need to help each other very much. And so it's a lot more of just like taking care of yourself and, just kind of clearing the map and things like that. I think Earth Defense Force can be this way. The normal Earth Defense Force can be this way as well. But the big difference is once you get to like more challenging missions. One thing I don't like about all Earth Defense Force games, I think, is that it feels like there's a really strong like grind wall at the start of the game where basically unless you go through and you're kind of forced to go through and play through the easier difficulties. I think there's like literal stat reasons why it makes it very hard to clear a hard mission in a way that's kind of frustrating. And so a lot of the game is kind of like using these weapon drops you get throughout the game as a way to kind of build yourself up enough to challenge the next mission. But if you follow the standard path the game offers, I think the game's like very easy in that regard. So I think you have to get a lot of the joy for the main Earth Defense Force game, like the initial playthrough, through trying out the different weapons. In the case of World Brothers, through trying out the different characters and things like that and finding those combinations that you like. I think that is a lot of the appeal of these kind of like earlier parts of these games that are a lot less challenging. Typically what I've found is that when we have played Earth Defense Force games, and rather than going and replaying the game on hard and things like that, we just kind of like buy the downloadable content that has like the hard missions in it. And how hard they are kind of varies pretty substantially, but they do typically get pretty hard. And that's really when I think Earth Defense Force really starts to shine in terms of its collaborative efforts. And I think World Brothers doesn't shine nearly as much because of that in those situations. So, but I think as a casual game, as like one where you're just like sitting down and having fun with some friends, and you don't want to like do a lot of coordinating and things like that, or you don't want to like have a lot of specific pressure on you, I think World Brothers is actually pretty cool for that. And aesthetically, it pretty much matches it too. I mean, Earth Defense Force has always been this like kind of goofy series with like, soldiers that kind of like die and then they'll like scream out loud over the intercom about like their kids at home, but it's like all done in a very tongue-in-cheek kind of way where it's like all kind of goofy and things like that. And so there's like that level of humor there, but the type of humor in World Brothers is like pretty different. It's a lot more kind of like kids cartoony. There's like a whole thing about like, we gotta go find the miso soup in Japan land with the ninja as the main character or something like that. And it's a lot more of that kind of like kids style humor. But at the same time, I also think that it is a game that like visually kind of fits that. I guess if you're looking for a EDF game for kids, this is an option. Yeah, it's just like a different type of humor. But I think both Earth Defense Force games are funny in their own way, kind of thing. So I think it's really cool the game like kind of distinguishes itself in that way, though, and I think it's more of like an option for you rather than necessarily a replacement for Earth Defense Force. I think maybe the only other issues I have is like, I feel like there's like some slight issues when it comes to, you have like these NPCs that are behind you and they're always out behind you and they take a lot of damage. And so a lot of times it feels like, your entire party can just melt and you don't really have a lot of control over it because you just couldn't like do evasive maneuvers with the other characters. So I feel like, especially in the harder missions, you end up in situations where like your main character is the only one who ever stays alive. So you have to kind of like pick and choose. And that is kind of where things might get a little bit more like collaborative, but most of the time you can kind of pick up another character and you just kind of mash the teleport button to keep them on top of you as much as possible, because like basically you can click a button to call them to you and they'll teleport to you. And so if you keep doing that, they'll at least stay like on top of you almost directly, so you can kind of control them, but you have to sit there and mash the Q button if you're playing on keyboard all the time, kind of thing. So it's kind of silly, but I think that's part of the fun of World Brothers, is that it is very silly as a game. I do think it lacks the legs of like an Earth Defense Force game, but I do personally, I've always kind of felt like Earth Defense Force games just kind of are a little too long for me. Obviously, if you're an Earth Defense Force fan, that's a very different thing. It feels like people like will really go hard on Earth Defense Force, and I would love to better understand kind of the logic behind, not the logic, but like the reasons why They love kind of grinding that same experience over and over and over again on harder difficulties. But I'm gonna guess it's probably a lot of the same reasons of just like a lot of cool different weapons to try, and a lot of like coordination and like probably working with your class, right? I think that's the big thing. Is like how can you maximize how your class works and that kind of thing. And I'd imagine as the game gets harder as well, coordination is a huge deal. And I wouldn't be surprised if World Brothers is the same thing. World Brothers 1, I will say, is pretty short overall in the grand scheme of what's it called? What are these games called? Grand scheme of Earth Defense Force games. I don't remember how many hours it was, but it felt like it was at maybe like half as long, if not a bit shorter than that. Again, we did the DLC missions and stuff, though, so a lot of that kind of got added on. There's a couple missions that definitely took us a couple sessions to like really sit down and get into. So, but yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I think I'm really glad I played it. It's one of those games I had my eye on for a really long time, and as a multiplayer game, I was just like, yeah, I'll just like hold off on it until it's time. It's time. And World Brothers 2 has been out for a while, but I just think that distinction between the mainline series and World Brothers as a series is pretty cool, and I think definitely like worth checking out. Depending on what you're up for, right? It's not 100% Earth Defense Force, but it sure does feel a lot like it.